Hello. Good evening, everybody. And we have a fine crowd again tonight. It's great to be back having talks live like this, and it's great to have, especially great to have a crowd. So, on behalf of Silvermines Historical Society, I'd welcome everybody here tonight, and I'll hand over to Dennis just in 1 second. I have a few people just to thank before we do that. First of all, as I said, thanks to everybody for turning out. It's a bad night, but it's a fine turnout. Jim Egan, Paddy always do the work behind the scenes, Donald Quinn, Joseph and David, who are recording the event here tonight, and the Ryan family, who always facilitate us. Huge thank you before I hand over to Dennis. Dennis has been a founder member of Silvermines Historical Society. I think we're on the road now 12 or 13 years, and huge part played by Dennis and of course Betty. Dennis was born and lives within a puck of the ball of where the incident took place that he's going to talk about. So he's familiar with the area and its surroundings. So that's all from me. Thanks very much again. I'll hand over to Dennis.
Good evening, everybody. You're all welcome here tonight. The 100th anniversary of the Tullam Island ambush just passed on Wednesday last, the 7th of March, and I'd like at this point, strangely enough, to dedicate this presentation to two former residents of Tullam Island, long gone to their eternal reward. They were my godparents, Mrs. Annie Dignan, Nee Daly, and Mick Ryan Bray. Now, so the Tullam Island ambush happened on Wednesday the 7th of March 1923 during the Civil War. The event happened in my townland where I have lived all my life. It is very appropriate that we're holding this talk here in Lacan's Dolla tonight, the 10th of March 2023. It is exactly 100 years ago today since Joe Mangan lost his life in the ambush. Also, the premises here is on the Tullam Island Dolla River, and the river provided an escape route for many during the War of Independence and the Civil War. Matt Ryan, who escaped from Tullam Island on the 7th of March, would have passed by this premises on his way to the safety of the mountains. Just 3 weeks later, Matt would lose his life in the Fileduff ambush. Recently, John Flannery, my brother Liam and myself, we visited Dignan's old house in Tullam Island, scene of the ambush. We had a drone footage of it there while we were waiting for the presentation, so you've got some bit of an idea of what the house looks like. Even after 100 years, it's still an amazing sight. The bullet holes are still visible, as is the landscape with its 10-foot drop to the safety and escape route of the river. At this point, I would like to acknowledge all the help received from the Dignan family, and in particular Dan. So I think Dan is there, and thanks Dan for all the help. So, in conjunction with Silvermines Historical Society, I'm making this presentation to mark the 100th anniversary of the Tullam Island ambush. I'm very aware that the Civil War, even after 100 years, is a very delicate subject, and I'll do my best to present the facts in a fair and impartial manner using the following sources. So, members of the Irish War, of the War of Independence and the Civil War, 1916 to 1923. It was written by Patrick F. O'Brien. Patrick was one of the Republicans directly involved in the ambush. Memoirs of a Tipperary family, the Gaynors, of Tion, 1887 to 2000. And the author was Eamon Gaynor. Sean Gaynor, Eamon's brother, was Divisional OC at the time of the Tullam Island ambush. Mining the Past 2012, our first edition, when we started off here in Dolla. Tullam Island ambush article written by Michael O'Brien, nephew of Patrick and Dan O'Brien, who were directly involved in the ambush. Under Cremlin Hill, War of Independence in Our Parish article written by Eugene Ryan. Historic Ballinaclough, I pulled from a good few bits and pieces. Historic Ballinaclough, compiled by Ballinaclough Guild of the Irish Countrywomen's Association. Patricia Mora and Maureen are part of our SHS members here, and they were involved in the publication. In bloody protest, North Tipperary's IRA Roll of Honour 1916 to 1926. It was written by local man Nina Parry-Hackett. Next, we have Forgotten Dreams, The Life and Times of Major J.G. Jed O'Dwyer, author Tom Toomey. Jed O'Dwyer was the captain of the Free State troops on the day of the Tullam Island ambush. I have another couple, just so we're not going to keep you all night, but we'll get through these anyway. Great Hatred, the assassination of Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson MP, and the author was Ronan McCreevy. And of course, the usual I've drawn from the Irish newspaper archives and the Military Bureau archives. So here we see the Four Courts occupation. Anti-treaty IRA had been occupying the Four Courts since April 1922. Here we have the Records Office, where records were stored dating back to 1174. It's all history now, and it's a crime to anyone that's trying to do research to know that an awful lot of that stuff was lost. Next guy we have up here is Henry Wilson MP. British Field Marshal Henry Wilson was assassinated in London on June the 22nd, 1922. He was returning to his home after the unveiling of a war memorial in memory of the First World War. Unknown to Henry Wilson, he was followed by two veterans of that war, Joe O'Sullivan and Reggie Dunn. O'Sullivan had lost a leg at the Battle of Ypres. Dunn and O'Sullivan were also members of the Irish Republican Army London branch. And before Wilson could make it from the taxi to his front door, they gunned him down. They were arrested and charged with murder and hanged in August of the same year, 1922. Henry Wilson was the most senior British political figure to die during the Irish Revolution, and his death inadvertently triggered the outbreak of the Irish Civil War 6 days later. Henry Wilson was a hate figure for Irish republicanism. At the time of his death, a Field Marshal of the British Army, the highest rank that one could attain in that force. He was an Irish Unionist born into a Protestant landowning Irish family with extensive lands in County Longford. He disagreed with his government's approach of deploying the Black and Tans during the War of Independence. He would have preferred instead to flood the country with up to 80 battalions of regular troops and declare martial law. He was opposed to the truce of 1921, insisting to the end that military victory was in sight. Michael Collins, now head of the provisional government in what was to become the Irish Free State, referred to him as a violent partisan. It was ironic that Joe O'Sullivan and Reggie Dunn, born and living in England, would be the assassins of Irish-born Henry Wilson. Now you might say, am I going off on a tangent here? Just another piece of information. Reggie Dunn's grandmother came from Greenan's Cross in County Monaghan. The crossroads were called after Greenan, and Dunn's grandfather was married to Mary Agnes Greenan. And my wife Betty went to primary school in Greenan's Cross. It's just a small national school situated on the crossroads. And as you can see, the school is now closed and is used as a community centre. We have another bit of interesting information. Sam Maguire is supposed to have given Dunn and O'Sullivan the order to assassinate Sir Henry Wilson, according to a 1953 Military Bureau statement by Joe Dolan. Joe Dolan was part of Michael Collins' intelligence group, and Collins sent Joe Dolan to England to check out the possibility of planning an escape for the convicted Dunn and O'Sullivan. My God, 6 days later, after the shooting of Henry Wilson on June the 28th, 1922, Free State troops opened fire in the Four Courts, signalling the start of the most tragic period in Irish history. On June the 30th, we showed you the Records Office. On June the 30th, 1922, the Public Records Office was destroyed, and with it, census records dating back to the first in 1821. The records of those who had lived before the calamity of the famine were lost forever. Records in different disciplines dating back to 1174 were destroyed in the fire. Again, another tragic loss. So you can see what's left, a pile of rubble. And here we have anti-treaty Republicans being captured. So we move on. Activity in North Tipperary, early 1923. Silvermines shooting. In early January, a 21-year-old Private William Hogan, a Free State soldier, was shot dead in the Vans public house in Silvermines. The pub is now owned by Tommy Hickey. It's up there on the right-hand side. Next we had Borsallee War Dead. Frederick Burke, Patrick Russell and Martin O'Shea, all from Borsallee, and Patrick McNamara from Ballina, were charged with possession without proper authority of guns and ammunition at Borsallee and Portrue. All of the accused were found guilty and sentenced to death. All were executed in Roscrea on the 15th of January 1923. Commemoration ceremonies were held recently in Borsallee and Ballina to mark the 100th anniversary of this tragic event. A sad accident near Nina. The Nina Guardian dated February the 17th, 1923, reported on a sad accident ending in a fatality at Kilmore. 42-year-old Michael Cuneen from Silvermines, married with 4 children, the youngest of whom was only 1 month old, was cycling to Nina to call at the county council offices with a view of getting employment on the roads section. He was clerk of the local Catholic church in Silvermines. At a bend near Kilmore, he was in collision with a Free State Army truck and died shortly afterwards from his injuries. Tragic occurrence in Nina. The Nina Guardian dated the 24th of March, a couple of weeks after the Tullam Island ambush, 1923, reported on a tragic event that happened that week. Patrick Hogan, well known as Brownson, from Summerhill, Nina, was mortally wounded as he was walking down Silver Street in Nina. Sergeant Tom Hayes, machine gunner in the Tullam Island ambush a few weeks earlier, was accused of the shooting. Mrs. Maher gave evidence under oath at an inquest into the death of Patrick Hogan. She stated that Sergeant Tom Hayes held Patrick Hogan against the wall of the house and fired point blank at him twice. Before the inquiry could be pursued further, Sergeant Tom Hayes was moved from Nina. Next we have the Fileduff ambush. These all happened early 1923. On March the 27th, a military party under Captain William Spain encountered a small party of Republicans in the Fileduff area. The shootout that followed, Republicans Matt Ryan and John Sheehy were killed and Patrick Hughes was captured. Matt Ryan had escaped a few weeks earlier from the Tullam Island ambush and probably passed this house here on his way to safety, as I said, up in the hills. On April the 14th, Paddy Ryan Lacken was captured in Hyde's house near Rare Cross. In a few weeks, John Flannery will give a talk. We'll have more details about when we set a time on Paddy Ryan Lacken. Paddy Ryan Lacken was a granduncle of Mary and Martin here in the pub. And now we come to the Tullam Island ambush. This is just a sample of the activity that happened around North Tipperary in the early 1923. Tonight we'll look at the Tullam Island ambush that occurred at Diagonal's house, Tullam Island, on the afternoon of the 7th of March 1923. The Tullam Island ambush was not the first tragedy to visit Tullam Island. The Nina Guardian, and I rely on it for a lot of stuff, dated January the 2nd, 1915, reported on a sad drowning fatality that occurred just 3 days after Christmas. 20-year-old Mary Ann Cash from Bultini was returning home with friends from a dance in Bannocklough. While crossing the flooded Tullam Island River, she lost her footing and was swept downstream and drowned. The fact that Mary Ann was the only daughter among 5 boys born to John Cash and his wife Mary compounded the tragedy. Here we have a picture of the Diagon house and scene of the ambush. It's a later picture, obviously, but I wanted to show this picture because that's Jimmy, a son Jimmy, an uncle or a father of Dan and Brendan and Tommy and Jimmy there at the front. That's the Tullam Island house, probably as it was on the time. The front door, the kitchen window and the parlour window. There's a couple of bedrooms at this side here. This is the Diagon house and scene of the ambush. The Diagonans originated in County Roscommon. Bartholomew Diagon, and it's spelled in the records then as the E-I-G-N-A-N. You probably have come across that yourselves. As spelt in the church marriage record, married Catherine Mattimo on the 3rd of March 1859 in the parish of Boyle, County Roscommon. They had several children, including Bartholomew, James and Bridget. Bartholomew was born on the 7th of August 1864 in the parish of Ardcarn, Coothall, County Roscommon. In the 1901 census, he is listed as living in House 1, Liss, Borsalee, with his brother James and sister Bridget. Bartholomew's occupation is listed as shepherd and James as agricultural labourer. In the 1911 census, and I should say that this James is the grandfather of the present Diagonans in Tullam Island. So in the 1911 census, Bartholomew is still listed as living in House 1, Liss, Borsalee, and his occupation is shepherd. Also listed with him is his wife Nora. He must have got married in between 1901 and 1911. And Nora, and Bartholomew and Nora lived all their lives in Borsalee and are buried there. I think his sister Bridget, listed in the 1901 census, died sometime between 1901 and 1911. We didn't really follow it up. Now, James Diagon and Annie Daly. James Diagon, grandfather of the current Diagonans, was born on the 12th of March 1876 in the parish of Ardcarn, Coothall, County Roscommon. As previously stated, James was living in Borsalee in 1901. In the 1911 census, James is listed as living in House 15, Rochestown, Derry Grat, Tipperary, and his occupation listed as shepherd stroke agricultural labourer. Annie Daly was baptised in the parish of Kilteely on the 25th of February 1886. Her parents were Timothy Daly and Annie Kincaid, I think is the name. James married Annie Daly from Kilteely, County Limerick on the 22nd of November 1911 in Rochestown, Care, County Tipperary. They had 6 children. Bartholomew was known as Bertie, and he later became, for any of us that knew him, Father Paul. He was born in Clarina, Limerick on the 9th of March 1913. Catherine, or Kitty as we knew her, was born in Clarina, Limerick on the 4th of January 1915. Tim, who later moved to Dublin, was born in Tullam Island on the 4th of March 1917. Nancy was born in Tullam Island September the 24th, 1919. Brendan, he was a Christian brother, he was born in Tullam Island the 15th of May 1922. And Jimmy, who you saw in the picture previously there, was born in Tullam Island the 15th of May 1924. Shortly after Kitty was born in 1915, James Dignan and his wife Anne moved to Tullam Island with their 2 children, Bertie and Kitty. James worked as a herdsman on the Webb Estate farm and lived with his family in an estate house beside the farmyard. Dignan's house in Tullam Island and Cleary's house close by were used as safe houses during the War of Independence and the Civil War, and continued to be used as safe houses, as I say, during the Civil War. Wednesday, March the 7th was an ordinary working day in the lives of the Dignan family. James was out on the farm attending to the animals on the Webb Estate. His wife Anne was making bread and looking after her 2 youngest children, 3-year-old Nancy and baby Brendan. He was less than a year. 10-year-old Bertie, or Father Paul as he became later, 8-year-old Kitty and 6-year-old Tim were at the local school in Ballinaclough. The school was located beside the Catholic Church in Ballinaclough and is now used as a community centre. Also billeted at the house were 10 Republicans. Just, we'll give another view, that's the one as the house is today. As I say, most of the house still stands. That window there, I'm open to correction, that was a parlour window. This is the kitchen window, the main door into the area, and a couple of bedrooms there at that area there. So Patrick F. O'Brien, in his memoirs, complimented the Dignan family, saying the loyalty, generosity and devotion shown to us by the Dignan family to whom the house belonged was overwhelming. The hospitality shown to us by the mother and 5 children would be difficult to meet. Patrick lists the following Republicans as staying in the house on that day: Jim Sullivan, Portrude, Brigade Quartermaster; brothers Patrick and Dan O'Brien, Silvermines; Sean Daly All, Division Engineer; Matt Ryan Boher, Divisional OC; Tim Buckley Cork, Division Quartermaster; Mick Tierney Offaly; Joe Mangan of Lawton near Moneygall, OC of the Active Service Unit; Stephen Davern Dublin, and Jack O'Brien Millbrook. Patrick F. O'Brien stated that all 10 Republicans slept in an attic with a skylight overhead the main living quarters. The skylight, there is a skylight still to the back of that there, but to be around that main living quarters there was an attic. Hard to believe. Jim Dignan, grandson of Annie, I think Jim is here as well tonight, I see you there, Jim, can recall his granny telling him about the men living in the attic and being fed via rope lowered from the ceiling. According to Patrick O'Brien, it was the idea of Sean Gaynor, Divisional OC, to establish brigade headquarters in the lowlands, to be in close contact with all the battalions and with Laois and Offaly. Tim Buckley, Sean Daly and Sonny O'Neill came from Cork on the 3rd of December 1922 and joined Sean Gaynor's No. 1 Brigade. Buckley and Daly had expertise in explosives and setting up mines. According to Gaynor's memoirs, there were many more Republicans there on the day, including Sean Gaynor OC and John Sheehy, Divisional Intelligence Officer. It is possible that these volunteers escaped in the initial outburst. Just a few weeks later, on the 27th of March 1923, both Matt Ryan and John Sheehy would lose their lives in the Fileduff engagement. Gaynor also states that Tullam Island and Fileduff were used by officers of the Tipperary No. 1 Brigade as headquarters in the Upper Ormond part of the county. If this is true, there probably was an officers' meeting being held on the day of the ambush. Now, we come to Captain Jed O'Dwyer. He led the ambush at Tullam Island on the 7th of March 1923. He was the second in command to Commandant Liam Hoolan, the OC of the 11th Infantry Battalion at Nina. He was the third appointment to the position of captain in Nina area in a very short space of time. His predecessors, Captain Terence O'Byrne, was killed at Nina on the 1st of July 1922 when supervising the erection of fences at the Ormond Hotel, which was then being used as a temporary barracks. And on December the 1st, Captain Thomas Walsh died after being injured while carrying out searches in the Rare Cross, Newport area. John Gerald O'Dwyer was born on the 12th of April 1899. He was the youngest of 3 children born to John O'Dwyer and Bridget Hayes. He was actively involved in the War of Independence in Limerick. On December the 26th, 1920, a dance was held in Gilmore, Limerick. The purpose of the dance was to raise funds for the purchase of arms. A huge number of military police and hands stormed the building. 5 IRA volunteers were killed and many more were injured. Jed O'Dwyer escaped capture but was injured in the event. After the truce, Jed O'Dwyer travelled to Dublin by train on the 4th of February 1922, where he was commissioned as an officer in the newly formed Free State Army. Map of Ballinaclough. This would be a map from 1923. This is how the place would look at that time. On Wednesday the 7th of March, information reached Commandant Liam Hoolan, the OC in Nina, that Republican forces were billeted at Tullam Island. Liam Hoolan informed Captain Jed O'Dwyer. Captain O'Dwyer stated later in his memoirs how he was surprised at how easy Commandant Hoolan seemed to receive accurate information. And I would have to say the word informer appears in many of the accounts that you read relating to the Tullam Island ambush. It is possible that information was fed to Commandant Hoolan, but we must realise that many of the Free State soldiers would have fought in the War of Independence and would be fully aware of the location of safe houses. On that Wednesday afternoon, Jed O'Dwyer left Nina Barracks with a detachment which included Lieutenants Gleeson and O'Brien, Sergeant Tom Hayes and 24 men. Their mode of transport being bicycle, much quieter and easier to spring a surprise attack. They travelled from Nina via Ballinaclough along the above road. Better show the above road. This would be coming from Ballinaclough. And to be along this road here, they didn't quite go as far as that point there, which is Dignans along this point here. But they travelled along this road. Situated on that road, approximately 500 metres from Dignans, was another safe house owned by Tom Cleary and Winnie. That one there. So they moved, it's way in off the fields. I don't remember the ruins of the house. My brother Liam tells me he can remember it all right. But another safe house. Like Dignans, many men on the run would have got food and shelter there. Kathleen Barry, a member of Cumann and a sister of Kevin Barry, once stayed there. The story is told that on one occasion, when their nephew, Republican Denny Lynch, was staying there, Free State soldiers were seen from a distance, and you can see the houses way back up in the fields. Then he made good his escape, but left bullets on the kitchen table. Mrs. Cleary hid the bullets under a hen hatching eggs in the lower half of the kitchen dresser. Obviously that was the scene in those times. To keep the hen would be safe from the foxes in the dresser anyway. The house was searched, but no ammunition was found. On their way to Tullam Island on the day of the ambush, the Free State soldiers called to Cleary's house again. They were looking for Denny's brother Jimmy this time, another Republican nephew of the Clearys. Luckily, Jimmy spotted him in time and escaped, made good his escape. This is a closer map of Diagnons. This was the road into Diagnons. We reckon the Free State soldiers came across the fields this way here. This is the Diagnon dwelling that I was showing you already. There was a hay shed back here which is gone, and there was a highish wall along there with a gate, and there was a shed here quite close to the Tullam Island River. This is the Tullam Island River, just along there. I'm showing you a ford in the river there and a footbridge at that point there. And that was the scene up to the 1950s. So you can see they made their way in along this way here and surrounded the house here. Captain Jeddah Dwyer and his troops continued the short distance to the Diagnon house in Tullam Island and proceeded to surround the house. I'll come back to this slide or this map in a few moments. Here we have a map of Kilrifford, Diagnons and the Buckgate, that kind of an area here. Meanwhile, John O'Brien, we knew him as Dan's Jack. He was a cousin of the O'Brien brothers, Pat and Dan, who were billeted in Diagnons, rode a horse down to Tullam Island from Ballincorr to warn the cousins of enemy activity in the area. Dan's Jack also worked on the Webb estate. The 1923 map shows the route Dan's Jack took. So we'll try and show you the route that Dan's Jack took. This is the bridge of Kilrifford around that area there. He came down, Ballincorr will be back this direction here. This is the new road that any are familiar with it, that was built in the 1950s when the Land Commission came in. But that road wasn't there obviously in 1923. So Dan's Jack came this way here, across the Dolla road, and along this road here, up along kind of a car track down to Diagnons. Just to show you another road back that direction there. I don't know if you can see it on the map, Tullamoylan, but this was a route over to Bailey's in Ballinaclough, where the two big houses, the Kilby, Denally's and Bailey's were linked up. The coaches used to go that direction there, over along that way there, and over to Ballinaclough. Now, cousin of the O'Brien brothers, Pat and Dan, who were billeted in Diagnons, rode a horse down to Tullam Island from Ballincorr to warn the cousins of enemy activity in the area. Now, I showed you the route that Dan's Jack took, and the new road, as we call it, did not come into existence until the 1950s, when the Webb estate was divided by the Land Commission. And I said there's a carriageway there. There's a carriageway there that links the two big houses in the area, the Nallys of Kilby and Bailey's of Debsborough, Ballinaclough. Dan's Jack arrived in Tullam Island and was talking to his Silvermines cousins. What he didn't realise was the house was almost surrounded. And when the firing started, the horse got excited and had to be released. James Diagnon also spotted the Free State soldiers and tried to get back to the house and warn the Republicans, but he was held up by the soldiers and allowed go no further. Mick Gleeson, Kilrifford, worked on the Webb estate also, and had been down in Tullam Island and was foddering cattle in this shed here, that shed at that point there. So he'd have got hay or whatever it was, hay, no silage that time, hay, and he came back this route in to the Buck Gate. He was returning home back to Kilriffit via the Buck Gate and the Dolla Road when he was held up by Free State soldiers. These soldiers had been sweeping across from the Silvermines and would later join the ambush in Tullam Island. And just some of you that might have known these two men, Mick Gleeson, my father here on the left, and Dan's Jack, Danny and Pat O'Brien, the Lord mercy him, Danny's father there. This is a photo of Mick Gleeson and Dan's Jack, taken in later years. And here we have another photo. I call it Harvest Time in the Webb Estate. This photo is circa around 1943 of a harvest time on the Webb Estate. Gordon Webb farmed about 300 acres in Tureen and Tullam Island area and lived in Currabawn House near Newtown, Nina. The estate was acquired by the Land Commission and divided in the early 50s. And just to show you a few, Dan's Jack, Mick Gleeson, that's my mother, Maher Man, Mort Bryan, Nicholas Feely, Pat Webb, and this is Gordon Webb here, the owner. So, just to put some kind of a name on it. Now, here we have an up-close map that shows the Dignan dwelling house. Just this point here, the Dignan dwelling house. This barn here is very important. It's not there now, but as the story progresses, you'll see that this barn had a tale to tell. Back here, there's a barn here. I think there was a highish ditch there, about 10 feet back. So, I said we'd come back to that again. The river and the footbridges we need to look at there as well. This is a ford in the river. That's where that girl got drowned around 1915. There was no bridge across that. The bridge didn't come back there until 1950s. There's two footbridges, one there and one there. We actually used that footbridge going to school in Ballinaclough, and that's, well, it's a good while ago. Now, this is a layout diagram drawn by Mick Gleeson, Kilriffit. The Free State Army were equipped with at least one machine gun operated by Sergeant Tom Hayes, as I say, for the start of the ambush. The 24 remaining soldiers held rifles, and we have an example of the rifles here, kindly loaned by the Burks in Clonmore, so thank you for that. And I think everybody is free to it's decommissioned, so we're safe enough, aren't we? So thanks for bringing it on. It makes it all the more worthwhile. So when the Republicans realised what was happening, they tried to make good their escape by running in the direction of the river. And here we have the river along that way there, the Dolla Tullam Island River, Ballinaclough in that direction, Dolla back up in this direction. Matt Ryan, carrying a Thompson gun, escaped upriver in the direction of Dolla. You had the gunner here, Tom Hayes. He was back about 10 feet back here, and the guys were coming out of the house in this direction here and heading to get to the river, because if you visited the site, you could see that once you have the safety of the river, it would be very hard to be caught, because there is at least 10 feet of a drop and it's still there. As I said in the beginning, it's an amazing site to visit even today. So that was the gunner at that stage. Here is Matt Ryan, and he escaped upriver, upstream here. A filed up locals account, as recorded in Pádraig Hackett's book in Bloody Protest, states, when Matt Ryan was escaping, he possibly broke his toe when he jumped into the Tullam Island River, and I could well imagine because of the depth. This slowed him down when he was escaping in Filed Up and was a contributory factor in his death. A Fileduff local also claims that day in Tullam Island that Matt was hit in the back, the bullet lodging in his heavy history books which he carried in his backpack. Now, I don't know if you can see that, Jack O'Brien and Stephen Davern, Dublin, they escaped downstream in the direction of Ballinaclough. Stephen Davern also escaped in the Fileduff ambush. Other Republicans, such as Sean Gane or John Sheehy, if they were there at the time, would possibly have escaped, I'd imagine, upriver towards Fileduff. All the remaining Republicans made a run for it towards the river, along that area there, towards the river, out the door and heading that direction there. We have to assume that Joe Mangan was first out, followed by Sean Daly, Tim Buckley, Mick Tierney, and brothers Dan and Patrick O'Brien. In the initial gunfire from Hayes' machine gun, Joe Mangan was wounded in the lower body and the knee area. The rest of the Republicans were forced back into the house. It would appear that Sean Daly then moved the wounded Mangan to the safety of the nearby shed, that barn there. So Sean Daly would have moved him to there, and he must have moved him into the shed. Joe Mangan's coat was later found in the shed with bullet holes in the lower section of the coat. It was in this incident that Sean Daly was later shot after he had carried Joe Mangan to the safety of the shed. Sean himself received a very serious head wound and lay incapacitated in the yard. Captain Jeddah Dwyer of the Free State Army dragged Sean Daly to the shelter in the lee of the ditch. There would have been a few ditches around the front of the house. So Sean had a very serious head wound, and some of his brain matter was exposed, and it looked as if he would not survive. Pádraig Hackett, in his book Bloody Protest, stated that Commandant Bill Hoolan had sworn to bring in Sean Gaynor, dead or alive. Sean Daly, after his capture, was semi-conscious and was being questioned as to his identity, but of course all he could whisper was Sean. The Free State soldiers then mistakenly announced they had captured Sean Gaynor, and the rumour spread like wildfire. At this point on the Wednesday afternoon, Matt Ryan had escaped upriver in the direction of Dolla. Jack O'Brien and Stephen Davern had escaped downstream in the direction of Ballinaclough. Joe Mangan lay seriously wounded in the nearby shed. Sean Daly lay seriously wounded in the shelter of a ditch. And the remaining 5 Republicans, Jim Sullivan, Tim Buckley, Michael Tierney, and brothers Pat and Dan O'Brien, were back in the relative safety of the Dignan house. Also trapped in the house was Mrs. Dignan with her 3-year-old daughter Nancy and baby Brendan. The plan was for the Republicans trapped in the house to hold the Free State Army at bay until dusk, and then dash through with revolvers and make good their escape. Mrs. Dignan with her young child Nancy and baby Brendan went to the safety of the bedroom, and Patrick O'Brien shouted to the Free State soldiers not to fire in that room. Patrick acknowledges that shots were not fired in that direction. The children coming home from school were stopped by the soldiers and not allowed to go any further. As the siege continued, it was obvious to Free State soldiers that the Republicans would not be dislodged easily. A message was sent back to Nina requesting more backup, ammunition and grenades. With the arrival of extra soldiers and ammunition, a fierce battle persisted. Pat O'Brien in his memoirs states, there were 3 machine guns in operation that afternoon. Pat O'Brien, Dan O'Brien and Mick Tierney were concussed at one stage from the explosion of grenades. Here we have William O'Brien, or Bunt Bryan as we knew him, he was known mainly as Bunt. Meanwhile, William or Bunt Bryan, brother of the Silvermines O'Briens, fired shots with a rifle from a nearby hill to try and distract the Free State soldiers. Dan O'Brien, Dan's Jack's father, uncle of William, was probably loading a second rifle for Bunt. Because of the quick-fire action, go back there a minute now. Sorry for this now. Pressed the wrong button. Okay. Because of the quick-fire action, Captain of the Wire believed a machine gun was being used. In February 1994, and we show a drawing from where the quick fire was coming from. This is the tower in Ballincourt. It's hard to imagine, but you have to be down in Dignan's, and that's a photograph taken recently from the front of Dignan's house, and here you have clear view of, well, there's a water tower there now at this stage, but that's where Bunt Bryan was firing the rifle, and in quick succession, giving the impression that there was a machine gun raining bullets down on Tullam Island. It's a fair old distance as well, but obviously it was having some bit of an effect. In February 1994, Jed of the Wire met Mick Gleeson Kilrifford, who, although unarmed, had been with the Republicans earlier that morning. Mick confirmed that a Republican named William O'Brien had fired shots with a rifle and not a machine gun from a nearby hill that day. And Pádraig Hackett here mentions a second rifle being fired by Dan O'Brien. It was probably loaded by Dan, and I'd say fired by William. I'd say he was so quick on the go. Mick also remembers a Lieutenant Ayres and an NCO bringing the crate of grenades to the Free State troops. More than 100 troops and 3 machine guns continued with the siege. According to Patrick O'Brien, and a Dignan relative account as well, several Free State soldiers could have been shot towards the end of the siege. There were no casualties on the Free State side. As dusk was approaching on that March evening, the Republicans were running low on ammunition. The Free State soldiers, having increased their numbers, surrounded the house and in the process expended a huge amount of ammunition. To avoid the embarrassment with the overuse of ammunition, the Free State soldiers came back to Tullam Island the following day to gather up the spent bullet cases. From the increased presence and pressure exerted by the Free State soldiers, the Republicans had no option but surrender. Their ammunition had run out. The 5 Republicans had a quick review of their position, and Pat O'Brien, the highest ranking officer of the group inside the house, ordered the surrender. It is hard to imagine the relief Mrs. Ann Dignan and her husband James experienced when they were finally united with their 5 young children after the surrender. The 2 wounded men, Sean Daly and Joe Mangan, were carried across the river using improvised stretchers. The stretchers consisted of bullet-ridden doors with rifles supporting the doors and 4 soldiers to each stretcher. The injured men were treated initially by the riverside before being carried by the soldiers to the bridge of Kilrifford. The 5 captured Republicans were marched to the bridge of Kilrifford also. One of the captured men, Dan O'Brien, was singing "When the Roses Bloom Again" as he was being led away. The rosary was recited Oscueliga by a member of Cumann on the bridge of Kilrifford. It was dark at this stage in the evening as the soldiers borrowed a storm lamp to check the injured Republicans before transportation to Nina. The captured Republicans were conveyed to Nina, promptly court-martialed and sentenced to death. The death sentence was later commuted to 15 years imprisonment. The fact that there were no casualties on the Free State side helped this decision, and possibly the proximity to the end of the Civil War played a big factor also. The two injured Republicans, Joe Mangan and Sean Daly, were removed to Nina Hospital. 3 days later, this day 100 years ago, Joe succumbed to his injuries. Joe's remains were removed on Sunday from Nina to Tumivara Church. As the sad procession passed through Nina, every sign of public sympathy was manifested. The cortege was headed by a big detachment of the Nina Cumann carrying wreaths. On Monday, Mass was celebrated by Reverend Father Hugh, after which interment took place in St. Cronin Cemetery in Roscrea. Father Hugh also officiated at the gravesite. The chief mourners, as reported by the Nina Guardian, were John and Mary Ann Mangan, the parents, Elizabeth, Kathleen and Annie, sisters, Daniel, John and James, brothers. Uncles, aunts, cousins and friends also attended. A farewell volley was fired after the burial. This is Joe Mangan's headstone situated in St. Cronin Cemetery, Roscrea. And at this point, I would like to pay tribute to the North Tipperary Monument Committee for the fabulous condition of the headstone. So well done. It's good to see it in such condition. The North Tipperary Monument Committee will be unveiling a plaque to the memory of Joe Mangan on Sunday next, 1 p.m. at Dignan's Old House, Tullam Island. And the headstone inscription, you may not be able to read it there: young, unselfish, generous, brave, freely his fresh young life he gave. He could not live a contented slave, better fill a patriot's grave. His was a soldier's calling. Now, here we have Joe Mangan's house in Lawton, Moneygall. I would like to thank Jim Dignan down there and his neighbours Alma and Mark Everett. Alma and Mark now live in House 1, Mangan's old residence, the house you see there at the moment, and Joe there in the insert. Joe Mangan was the second youngest of 11 children. His parents were John Mangan and Mary Ann Mangan, nee Sharp, Roscrea. He was born on the 6th of January 1901. In the 1911 census, he's shown as living in House 1 in Ballinlough, Tullamoylan, Kings County. John, the father, is aged 61 and occupation herdsman. Mary Ann, the mother, is aged 49. Dan is aged 23 and occupation labourer. Jack is aged 19 and occupation labourer. Catherine is aged 18. Teresa May is aged 15. Annie is aged 12. Joe is aged 10. And James is aged 7. All are listed as scholars. 4 Mangan siblings, Bridget, Lizzie, William and Margaret, listed on the 1901 census, are not listed on the 1911 census. John Mangan and his son Dan worked on the nearby Lawton estate as herdsmen and labourer. The family lived in House 1 attached to the estate. The nearest relation of Joe's that I spoke to recently was Maureen Doddy. She is a grandniece and I spoke to her again today. She probably would have come here tonight but for the bad weather. Now, this is a recent photo of Mangan's house, and would you believe it, Dignan neighbours, hard to get away. Dignans are finding it hard to get away from Mangans. After 100 years, there is still a connection. Jim Dignan, grandson of Annie Dignan from Tullam Island, is living next door to the old Mangan house. Jim told me an interesting story about the metal ornament if I can point it out, that metal ornament. If you look ahead on the Mangan house there, and it's missing here, you can see it is damaged. Joe used it for target practice at some stage. A far cry from windows getting broken from the belt of a slitter. We think we have problems now with young lads breaking windows. Prior to the Civil War, close neighbours Jack Collison and Joe Mangan would have fought alongside each other in the War of Independence at the Motherini ambush, but were killed on opposite sides in the Civil War. As Eugene Ryan, in his article in their Dunkerque Historical Journal under Kremlin Hill states, both men dedicated their lives to achieving independence for Ireland, but sadly ended up on opposite sides in the Civil War. Now, Sean Daly was severely injured. So we got a bit of information on Sean Daly on Monday. Myself and Betty went down to Youghal. So I'll give you what I have anyway. It's reasonably accurate. Sean Daly was born on the 15th of February 1900 in Youghal, County Cork. His father was born in Barada, Clonmalt, County Cork. And his mother, Hannah O'Neill, was born in Ballyphilip, Knockanore, County Waterford. Believe it, not too far from Youghal. John and Hannah had 7 children, 4 daughters and 3 sons. Sean, or Jack as he was known, if you talked about Sean Daly in Cork, they'd correct you and say it was Jack. Sean was the 3rd oldest. In the 1911 census, John and Hannah are listed as living in House 2, South Main Street, Youghal, and both their occupation are listed as publican and cattle dealer. And if you know Youghal and this old town clock, that's the old, the area where Sean Daly lived and grew up in. There was a pub, and he was a cattle dealer as well there, in that point there. This is an older drawing of it, but it's hard to see it. The front of the building has been changed slightly. But if you go down to Youghal today, you can still see it. They owned a public house in Youghal called Jack Daly's Bar. The last Daly to own the bar was Kate, sister of Sean, and it was known as, of all things, Sean's sister, it was known then as Katie Daly's Bar. We had a Katie Daly's here as well, but this is Katie Daly's Bar. The bar has changed hands on a few occasions since, and is now trading as JD's. It's not a Jack Dial, or a Jack Daly, it's a Jack Dial now, but it's JD's. Sean was an active member of the IRA while in college. In a Bureau of Military History witness statement made by Michael V. O'Donoghue, a former UCC classmate of Sean's, he states that himself, Sean, and other engineering students attended a course on explosives, landmines, booby traps, road and rail obstruction and destruction while in college. On the 3rd of December 1922, Tim Buckley, Sonny O'Neill and Sean Daly joined Sean Gaynor's No. 1 Brigade in North Tipperary. As already described, Sean Daly received a very serious head wound, and it was thought he would not survive. On the 7th of March, he was removed to Nina Hospital and was transferred to a Dublin hospital on Wednesday the 11th of April. He was accompanied to Dublin by Dr. Courtney. A metal plate was implanted in his skull, and he made a complete recovery. The only side effects were headaches. His nearest relation is a second cousin, Margaret O'Connell. She informed me that Sean immigrated to America after the Civil War, but only remained there a short time as he could not stand noise from traffic. He returned to Youghal and owned a shop on Cork Hill that his sisters Alice and Anna worked in. The shop was close to the army barracks. He also farmed close by. He owned a good bit of land around Youghal. The Dignans spoke very highly of Sean, saying, Sean Daly was from Cork, was always a favourite in our home. One of the nicest people you could ever meet. There was a rose bush out the back, and my mother always referred to its flowers afterwards as Sean Daly's roses. Sean would have revisited Tullam Island on several occasions afterwards. Back home in Youghal, he was elected to the local town council and served for many years. He was chairman of the council in 1954, the year Moby Dick was made. Part of the film was screened at Youghal Quay. John Huston was director. And I think we have shown of that there. This is Huston signing the freedom of Youghal, and that's Sean Daly there at the back. I presume these are more councillors, they're listed there. John Huston was director. As chairman of the council, county council, or the city council, or urban council I should say, Sean travelled to New Bedford, Massachusetts for the premiere of the film. Now, I'm afraid this is a bit sad. On a recent trip to Youghal, I met with Sean's second cousin, Margaret O'Connell, her husband Tommy, granddaughter Lucy, and a great-grandson Neil. Margaret informed me that Sean didn't practice as an engineer in Ireland and had very good health up to 3 weeks before he died. He died on the 15th of March 1977, so he was 77 years of age, and he's buried in North Abbey Cemetery. Unfortunately, the headstone was blown down in a recent storm and was damaged. Hopefully something can be done about it. And it's blown down, you can't read the writing. I'm told his name is on the headstone. He wasn't married. So hopefully something can be done about that. Now, John Sheehy and Matthew Ryan. Matt Ryan was from Boher Ballina. He served many years in the grocery business in Neenah. Subsequently, while in business in Cork, he took a leading role in the War of Independence. Just 20 days earlier, Matt escaped upriver from the Tullam Island ambush. John Sheehy was from Killalane, Ballynahinch, and was a farmer. On March the 27th, 1923, Matt, along with his colleague John Sheehy, lost their lives in the Fileduff ambush. Matt was aged 30 and John 27. And again, we have they're both buried quite close to each other, the headstones in Kilmastolla graveyard on the edge of the road there on the Limerick Road. Now, a bit of information on the remainder of the guys. Jim Sullivan, he was from Castletown, Portrue. He was grandfather, I'm right on that, Castletown, aren't I? He was grandfather to the present Rocky Sullivan, Kickham Street, Neenah. He was married to an aunt of JP here, JP MacDonald. He bought the bar in Kickham Street, Neenah in 1925. He was a rate collector. He also farmed and ran a successful auctioneering business. He died in 1962 and is buried in Lisbonny. Mick Tierney, I'm afraid I can't get information on him at the moment. Pat O'Brien, in his memoirs, has him listed as a teacher from Offaly. He was captured on the day of the ambush, and he would have been sentenced to death and commuted to 15 years imprisonment afterwards. Tim Buckley, we have a good bit of information on Tim Buckley. We know Tim Buckley, along with Sean Daly and Sonny O'Neill, joined Sean Gaynor's brigade in December 1922. Tim Buckley was very much involved in the War of Independence and Civil War. He gave a report to the Military Bureau in 1957, saying he would write a report on the Civil War later. He was originally from Macroom, County Cork. He moved to Offaly and was appointed quartermaster of the anti-treaty IRA's 3rd Division, covering Laois, Offaly and North Tipperary. Buckley was frequently mentioned in National Army intelligence reports. The Laois and Offaly IRA columns are covering ground very quickly and have taken full advantage of Buckley's recent training in secrecy. I'm quoting something here, in secrecy, silence and vigilance. He was considered capable, tough-minded and a strict disciplinarian. His status as a stranger with close ties to IRA General Headquarters meant he was a serious proposition to deal with. On the 14th of August 1922, he was involved in an attack on the National Army barracks at Kenyon Street, Nina, where James Nolan, an IRA officer, was hit with shrapnel and killed. On the 18th of November 1922, he was responsible for a Bank of Ireland raid in Kilbeggan, where £823 were seized. He was aged 30 at the time of the Tullam Island ambush. He spent some time in Offaly along with Matt Ryan, carrying out organisational work for the brigades in that county. He would have met Stephen Davern, that we mentioned earlier, whilst in Offaly. He was 30 at the time of the Tullam Island ambush. After his capture, he was interned in Limerick Jail and Newbridge internment camp. He was named on the list of dangerous prisoners. After release, he didn't get his old railway job back and emigrated to America. He returned to Mallow in the late 1930s and worked for the sugar factory there. He applied and was granted a military service pension in June 1937. Tim died on the 24th of June 1965 in Mallow, County Cork, aged 65. Stephen Davern, and this is a sad case, and I came across it recently. Stephen Davern was from Stony Batter in Dublin. He escaped downstream in the Tullam Island River with Jack O'Brien Millbrook. According to military archives, Stephen joined the Dublin Brigade of the Irish Volunteers in 1917 at the age of 15 years of age. He was heavily involved in the War of Independence around Dublin. He states that on the night of Bloody Sunday, the 21st of November 1921, he was arrested and interned and held in Ballinkilner internment camp, County Down. He was released in late December 21. He was involved in much activity around Dublin during the War of Independence and the Civil War. In September 1922, he had to move to Offaly and was appointed Battalion Vice Commandant under the command of Commandant James Keena, Battalion Commandant. In late 1922, he was invited by Matt Ryan to transfer to Tipperary and was appointed Brigade Intelligence Officer under the command of Paddy Ryan Lacken. Matt Ryan and Tim Buckley had been in Offaly at this time. He escaped from Tullam Island with Jack O'Brien Millbrook. He was also involved in the File Duff ambush, and he escaped with Sean Gaynor and Jim Murphy, Brigade Officer. After the Civil War, Stephen went to England, where he spent 2 months in hospital in Salford. He later moved to Oakland, California, where he made an unsuccessful application for a military pension in 1934. On the 7th of April 1936, Stephen wrote a 29-page document to the Military Pensions Board detailing all his activity from joining the IRA at 15 years of age in 1917 to his capture and imprisonment in April 23. His sister Rose Davern applied again on his behalf and stated that he was suffering from hemorrhages in the stomach. There is no further information available on Stephen Davern except that he was unsuccessful in his application for a pension. And I assume he died some time afterwards, around 1943 in California. He has wrote, it's there on the internet, on the pension section. He has 29 pages of handwritten stuff and beautiful writing. Again, he seemed to have been turned down for the pension on a couple of reasons, one of them being that he stated Joe Mannion instead of Mangan, and he spoke of Sean Daly as Joe Daly, and the pensions record committee had no record of Joe Mannion being killed. So a very tragic setup, and probably needs further investigation if somebody had the time. Who have we coming up now? Patrick O'Brien. These are the O'Brien brothers. Patrick was born near Ula in County Limerick in 1891. Pat trained as a national teacher in the De La Salle College in County Waterford and was registered as being there in 1911 census. His first teaching post was in Bolingbroke National School in Silvermines Parish, but due to ongoing War of Independence activity, he would lose his position. Pat was involved in engagements in the Rag, Borsicane Barracks, Kilcommon Ambush and Motherini during the War of Independence. He was one of the last prisoners to be released after the Civil War. Pat eventually secured a teaching post with the Christian Brothers in Tralee. He died in 1973 and is buried in the local cemetery. Dan O'Brien. Dan was born in Silvermines on the 13th of November 1903. At 16 years of age, Dan was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment in Wormwood Shrubs prison in London for attempting to shoot 2 black and tans in Silvermines. He was released after 6 weeks owing to his youth. Dan eventually secured employment as a lockkeeper on the canal in Dublin and lived in the lockkeeper's house at the 5th Lock. He hurled with the Fox in Dublin. He died in 1999 and is buried in Bluebell Cemetery in Chicore. Willem O'Brien, or Bunt as we knew him, who fired from Ballincore Hill, always known as Bunt, was born on the 25th of July 1896. His parents, John and Julia from Limerick, she was Julia Ryan, I think, Julia Ryan from Limerick, they had 10 children. His father, John, was a member of the RIC and was stationed in Kerry, Limerick and Kilkenny before moving to Silvermines. Bunt, along with his brothers Pat, Jack and Dan, were all involved in the War of Independence and the Civil War. Bunt lived all his life in Silvermines and worked locally as a tradesman. He was much involved in the local hurling club and served as a player, referee and club officer. He died in Silvermines on the 30th of June 1970 and is buried in Kilmore Cemetery. So that's Patrick, Dan and Bunt, brothers in Silvermines. This is Jack O'Brien, Millbrook. This is a photo of Jack O'Brien of Millbrook with his wife Josephine in New York. Jack was born in 1901 and was a student at Agricultural College, Clonakilty, before the Tullam Island ambush. Jack escaped with Stephen Davern downstream towards Bannockcroft on the day of the ambush. His brother Mick also went to America. Jack died in America on the 27th of December 1963. Now, we have a bit on Jed O'Dwyer. Tom Toomey, in his book Forgotten Dreams, relates a strange story that happened to Jed O'Dwyer when he was temporarily transferred to Youghal. And funny enough, the barracks in Youghal was looking out on Sean Daly's land. He owned land in front of the barracks in Youghal. Around late spring or early summer 1924, Jed O'Dwyer was sent on temporary secondment to Youghal in Cork. The barracks was located close to Sean Daly's land and shop. Shortly after the arrival at the barracks, an NCO handed him a message inviting him to call to Daly's shop and public house. You remember the shop that we showed you with the red door? Although a little apprehensive and unsure, Jed availed of the invitation. He was met by Sean Daly, who still bore evidence of a serious head wound. Remember, it was only 3 years, or what year was it? 1924, just a year after it. The Daly family and Jed had dinner and spent the evening together. Obviously, the family showed no ill feeling personally to Jed. In April 1926, and that's why we show the horse racing photograph there, and probably that's Limerick Lace, I would say, began Jed O'Dwyer's very successful association with international show jumping when he was summoned to McGee Barracks in Dublin, where it was proposed to set up a military horse jumping team. Major Liam Hoolan, Jed O'Dwyer's former OC in Nina during the Civil War, was given overall responsibility for organisation of teams. Jed O'Dwyer and his horse Limerick Lace were one of the most feared combinations in international show jumping in the 1930s, when the Irish equestrian team were almost unbeatable. Major Jed O'Dwyer resigned from the army on the 10th of October 1943 and returned to his native Limerick, where he farmed and raised horses. Major O'Dwyer died on the 16th of March 1996. He was aged 97. He's buried in Grange Cemetery, and I think the first one here on the left is Jed O'Dwyer, and the other one is the 5 Republicans who got killed in the ambush. He's resting close to the 5 volunteers who were killed in the ambush at Cahergilmore when he himself escaped escaped. Now, we're nearly there, folks, just bear with us. Paddy Ryan Lacken, and again, we haven't very many photos of Paddy Ryan Lacken, so again, thanks for that photograph. This photo was taken in New York of Paddy Ryan Lacken, his wife Nancy, and Jack O'Brien of Millbrook. Remember we spoke about Jack, who escaped downstream. After the Civil War ended, and we spoke about a good few of them having to go to America, many had to emigrate as they could not secure employment at home in Ireland. Paddy Ryan Lacken and Jack O'Brien left Ireland and never again set foot on Irish soil. So while it looks a jovial photograph, it's a sad thing as well that these people never came back. And again, folks, we're coming out to the end. So, again, the bit we want. On this day, this is the memorial card for Joe Mangan. On this day, the 10th of March, 2023, exactly 100 years since Joe Mangan died, we remember Joe and all those who lost their lives in the War of Independence. Before I finish, just to say thanks to Betty for her genealogy searches for me, and Michael for his drone expertise, and again all those who provided photos and artifacts. Again, it makes the night all the better. And I think I now call on Father Tim O'Brien here. It would be very appropriate to call him Father Tim, nephew of Jack O'Brien, who escaped down the Tullam Island River with Stephen Davern on that night, downstream on the Tullam Island River, maybe to just say a prayer. So I thank you for that. Can I have your mic for Father Tim? A mic for Father Tim. You have to get going there for him now. Yeah.
Hello? Yep.
Yeah.
Grand. In animate hours of vix and spirit nave, amen. God our Father, we pray eternal rest on Joe Mangan on the 100th anniversary of his death, and on all who were involved in the War of Independence and the Civil War. We remember also in our prayers all civilians like the Dignan family who were caught up in those events. As we look to the future, Make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, forgiveness. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. And when our earthly journey is completed, lead us to rejoice in your heavenly kingdom, where you live forever and ever. Amen. Amen.